Hi everyone, thank you for joining Built Visible's third webinar. Today I'll be talking about outreach, and this comes off the back of the outreach white paper which we launched about 2 months ago now. Also with me today we have Robin.
Hiya.
Who will be monitoring any questions that you may send through during the presentation. Before I get started, just a few practicalities. I have muted you. And also I have disabled chat. However, if you do have any questions, you can just send them through via the Q&A option. So for now, I'll just shut my video off and share my screen with you all. Okay, great. So let's get started. As I said, today we'll be talking about outreach, and this comes off the back of the white paper, The Complete Guide to Outreach. First of all, a few introductions. So my name is Olivia. I've been working at Built Visible for 5 years. 1 second. I think there might be some volume issues. Okay, I think volume's working again. Can people hear me all right? Hopefully the sound is working now. Okay, let's just 1 second. Okay, sorry about that, everyone. Just a few technical difficulties. So back to where I was. So yeah, like I said, my name is Olivia. I've been working at Built Visible for 5 years now. I'm a senior digital PR consultant, leading the digital PR and outreach arm within the content team here at the agency. I'm also the author of the Built Visible Complete Guide to Outreach white paper, which you may or may not have read already. Don't worry if you haven't, you can always download it later on. And yeah, just sit back and enjoy. As I said, if you've got any questions, just drop them into the Q&A. Alternatively, my email is at the bottom of each slide here, so simply olivia@builtvisible.com. I'm also on Twitter, so feel free to reach out that way if you prefer. Oh, sorry. Also with us today is Robin.
So hiya, I've been at Built Visible as a senior digital PR executive for around 2 years now. Prior to joining Built Visible, I have had both agency and in-house experience, but largely from a traditional PR background as opposed to digital.
Great, thank you. So before we get started, here's a quick rundown of the agenda and what I'll be covering. First and foremost, what is outreach and why should you care, more importantly? Second of all, getting started with outreach, so covering off a few of those fundamentals before you build out your outreach strategy. Thirdly, how to build an outreach list. So during this section, I'll run through a few methods that we employ here at the agency and talk about some of the tools that we use. Fourth, how to craft that all-important outreach email, when to execute outreach and follow up. And finally, after all that outreach effort's gone, how to sort of perform a project post-mortem and take those learnings and use that for future outreach campaigns. And then finally, answering any questions that you've sent through during the session. I know that we've received a couple ahead of today, so we'll answer those too. So what is outreach and why should you care? Well, done right, outreach is how your marketing content finds its way to the people who matter, the people that you want to get in front of. But if it's done wrong, it's ultimately a recipe for wasted budget. That sounds quite scary, but it's true. Nobody has time to waste ultimately. I should just note that when we're talking about content here, it really spans a vast spectrum. So we could be talking about sort of large scale hero content marketing campaigns, such as an interactive, right the way through to sort of smaller scale things like press releases or even a sort of reactive comment. We do all of that content here at Built Visible, also for outreach purposes, so just something to bear in mind. So what are the goals of outreach? We've got 3 here on the slide, but I would like to emphasize that this is by no means exhaustive, but certainly those that we come across often at the agency here. So sure, this is probably not too surprising to many of you. So links, very much a goal when it comes to outreach and hugely tied to SEO, brand coverage and mentions, as well as social engagement and shares. With all of these goals, they have quite direct outcomes, ranging from ranking increases, improved trust flow or domain authority, depending on which metric you prefer, signups, referral traffic, click-through rate, and so on. All of these hopefully contributing to improved revenue and sales. So, as I said, all of these goals are very much tied to quite tangible outcomes. So what's the first thing you do when it comes to outreach? This probably sounds quite obvious, nevertheless, hugely important. Get to know the content that you are outreaching. I've split this down into 4 key pillars. Firstly, your brand. Understand the brand that you're outreach on behalf of. At the end of the day, you're acting as their spokesperson. So a few things to sort of understand or get to know rather when it comes to the brand, including getting to know their USP, their core product offering, their positioning and messaging, tone of voice, and so forth. If you understand those sorts of things, you'll be able to sort of weave that into your outreach strategy and ultimately your outreach messaging. Context. By that, I mean gathering contextual information about the content that you are outreaching. So I think this is particularly pertinent if you were not involved in the production of the content from the very start. So types of contextual information that I think is really useful to know include getting to know what the KPIs are surrounding that content. So really that goes back to those goals that I mentioned earlier. Is it links? Is it sort of social shares and so forth? If you're pushing out a larger scale content marketing campaign, such as an interactive or whatever it may be, was there a strategy project behind it? Again, really important to get to know that strategy project if you yourself weren't the person who executed it. And also other contextual information that I think is quite important to know before pushing things out is sort of, is there any industry chatter surrounding the content that you're pushing out? So if your content is jumping on a trending topic, make sure you know what's sort of going on with regard to that topic. The next pillar is asset immersion. And by that, I mean immersing yourself in those outreach assets that you're pushing out and sharing with the public. Again, what those assets will be will vary hugely. It could be an interactive, it could be a static image, it could be press releases, it could be copy. Whatever those assets are, get to know them like the back of your hand. Other things to bear in mind, again, if you're pushing out something that does require sort of interaction, you yourself should know how to use that piece. Also, if there's any interesting methodology about how a piece came to be, or such as sort of crunching of numbers and so forth, just know those answers. Similarly, it might be that the piece that you're pushing out has a really interesting story. As an example, we did a piece for a travel insurance client a little while ago, which explored what it's like traveling with a mental health illness. Our illustrator who contributed to that piece and created the illustration assets, so the assets that we outreached, herself suffered from mental health illnesses. And we felt that that was actually a really important sort of story to share as part of the outreach process. So if the content that you have has sort of unique stories like that, bear them in mind when it comes to your outreach, because that might be really appealing to the people that you're sharing the piece with ultimately. And then your fourth pillar, supplementary, and by that I mean any content that goes alongside your leading content, as it were, but it might not be readily available. So again, using that interactive example, you might have a interactive on your client's website, which you're pushing out, but behind the scenes, there might be larger and more comprehensive data sets available. There might be complementary interview material or even alternative design assets. If that's the case, just know about them essentially and consider whether they would be appropriate during the outreach phase. And that's it really. So once you feel really comfortable about the content that you have to push out, it's time to consider what your outreach angles are going to be. So you should probably note that at Built Visible, Hooks and angles is something that we consider from the very beginning of our ideation process. They're very much at the fore of it, because ultimately, if we're creating content for outreach purposes, the idea is that the hooks and the angles might well be a journalist or a writer's future article headline. So as a result of this, we judge our content on the selection of criteria, which are detailed below, as you can see. It spells a lovely acronym, USHER, for the fans out there. Hello. So first and foremost, to consider when it comes to producing content and considering those angles, you need to think about whether it would be genuinely useful to your target audience. Does your content provide a genuinely practical element that will be of value to a reader? As an example, we did a piece for a health insurance brand, considering what it's like to live with diabetes. Within that piece of content, it included advice, personal stories, and top tips. So that was genuinely offering sort of helpful guidance to those who have diabetes or those who are covering health articles. Second point of consideration is, will your content offer up something surprising? For example, does it have a shock factor? This could perhaps be a staggering fact, which is perhaps not exactly publicly available. A third consideration, will your content or does your content tap into a trending topic? I would say with this particular sort of criteria, this would require some content that kind of needs to be turned around fairly quickly in order to sort of appease that trending topic. But again, just an example, we did a piece exploring the most Bitcoin-friendly cities during the Bitcoin sort of heyday. And as you can imagine, that was really well received and picked up at that time. A fourth consideration is, will your content elicit an emotional response? So whether that's anger or sadness, people really react well to things that elicit emotion, essentially. You can sort of see those headlines now, I'm sure. And then finally, does the content that you're producing, is it robust? So by that, I mean, is there sort of a robust data set? Is there a credible source from an expert? If there is, when it comes to sort of the outreach phase, that's something that you could really place emphasis on. Again, you can see how those articles might be formed, calling out a particular influencer or whatever it may be. It's all about making sure that that content is credible. Another really important tip to call out when it comes to sort of validating your content and specifically considering angles and hooks is doing something called preliminary outreach. Preliminary outreach is reaching out to relevant journalists or writers, a small subset of them, I might add, and sort of basically sharing with them a high-level content idea that you might have, seeing what the interest is. I think this is a really valuable step because sometimes you can get people coming back saying that they are interested, but they'd be interested in something, an additional data point, in which case you can try and accommodate that during the research and production phase, and hopefully that will seal buy-in once that piece is ready for outreach with that particular person who requested that data point. So preliminary outreach is really highly recommended. Okay, so some key principles about how to build an outreach list. I would just sort of emphasize that, of course, this is very much subject to your goals. However, these are some key principles that we follow here. So first and foremost, relevancy. When you're looking at publication or looking at a specific person, consider whether the content you have would be genuinely relevant to what they write about and what the publication writes about. If you can genuinely say yes, then absolutely that's worthwhile featuring on your outreach list. If you think maybe not, then perhaps deprioritize or take it off the list. So for example, if you've got a piece that is purely catering to the travel industry, I'd probably disregard reaching out to people who cover just health as an example. A second point, and as you can see, I've got that nice little SEO hat in the brackets there, is considering the trust and authority of a publication or a domain. For those who don't know, trust flow and or domain authority are third-party metrics from Majestic and Moz respectively. The higher the number, the more trustworthy or authoritative a site is. Now, a lot of people go about this by sort of only reaching out or looking at sites that are a DA plus a certain number, for example. I think that is a good approach. However, I think there are cases where maybe relevancy would outweigh that special number. So consider the scenario that, I don't know, you have capped only looking at sites that are plus DA 30. However, you found a site that's DA 25, however, hugely relevant to the content that you have, to your brand's target audience and so forth. So this is just a sort of a bit of a juggling act, weigh up sort of what's more important in that case. I would argue relevancy and therefore feature that website that is DA 25. A third consideration is follow versus no follow. Again, very much an SEO consideration. Again, for the purpose of those who don't know, a followed link is where a link value is passed on to another site, whilst no follow means link equity is not passed on to a site. More and more, we are seeing that sites are applying a site-wide no-follow policy, and there is a big discussion around this. My personal opinion is that it is still of value to reach out and reach out to sites that you know only offer up no-followed links. My rationale behind this is simply because although it might not have any direct SEO impact, it does improve and help with things like brand exposure, click-through rate, referral traffic. So there's a huge amount of benefit behind this. Furthermore, it could be that other sites find a piece of coverage from a site that only provides no followed links and they themselves cover it, in which case you'd then be able to reach out to them and see if they will offer up followed links. So a lot of opportunity there. And then the final point is actually exercising a little bit of common sense. And by that, I mean, if you're looking at a website and it looks like it's stuck in the Stone Ages, we're talking Encanter 95 days, then maybe reconsider. Also, make sure that the site you're looking at is still live. This is probably more applicable to those smaller niche sites. You can check if a site's active by looking at any social profiles and also having a look at their copyright, which should be on the footer of their website. And also another thing to just bear in mind is there some massive news story that's blowing up? You know, I'm sure we've all heard about Brexit and so forth. If that's the case, if there is something trending and ultimately saturating the news, then it might be worth pausing your outreach efforts to make sure that you can cut through that noise. So, how to find and validate contact details. I would just like to say that you don't necessarily need to have a massive budget or access to a huge toolkit here. And in fact, quite a few of these approaches really don't take any budget or need sort of fancy tools necessarily. So this first example is me finding editorial mastheads and staff lists. So this example here showcases that I'm interested in reaching out to the stylist. I've used a Google search operator here and I'm searching for or wondering whether stylist has a contact us page. As it happens, they have a FAQ page. And then if you see here on the right-hand side, that leads to a lovely list of names, of job titles and associated email addresses. I mean, this is really the dream scenario. It's taken me seconds to basically get a list of email addresses. Like to just highlight that if there's someone specific that you're after, but they're not on that list, don't worry about it, so long as you've got their name. You also can see their email format there, so you'll be able to apply their name and then hopefully be able to contact them. Second approach here is using Twitter and specifically all my tweets. So once again, you don't need to have budget here. All my tweets is a free tool. All you need is a Twitter account. So you've got a person of interest. This example is Liz Seagran, who works for the Fast Company. All you need to do is grab a Twitter handle, drop that in all my tweets, and then you see on the right-hand side, there is a list of, basically it's Liz's Twitter tweet archive. So I think it returns you just under 3,500 tweets. I'm hoping that at some point she has publicly shared her email to someone. So all I do here on the right-hand side is do a Control F. I'm searching for email. As it happens, she has shared her email address publicly. So again, this is the ideal scenario. You can just grab it and be sort of safe in the knowledge that that is her genuine email address. So when reaching out to her, I know that that's going to get to her, basically. Hunter also offers an email finder product. It has a very simple user interface. They do have a paid package, but also a free package. So I think the free package, you get up to sort of 100 searches. So you simply pop in the name and the name of the domain, and hopefully it will return an email address with a little green tick to highlight that the email address you have is correct and verified. Similarly, Hunter also has a validation tool. So again, just to make sure that who you're reaching out to is actually going to find your email. Another tool that we use often here to validate email addresses is mailtester.com. It's really simple. Again, you just drop in an email address, press that check address button, as you can see in this image, and hopefully if it's correct, it will return a nice bright green. I appreciate this particular tool does look like it's stuck in the Stone Ages, but of course, you wouldn't be reaching out to them to get your content posted there. If you are lucky enough to have sort of budget available, or perhaps you work for an agency, using media databases such as Gorkana and BuzzStream are really great when it comes to sort of scaling up your efforts for finding and validating contact details, as well as the other tools and websites listed here. So, how to find suitable sites and outreach targets. Not very sort of impressive necessarily as a technique, but hugely valuable. Using manual discovery with Google. By that I mean popping in related keywords to the content that you have to push out and seeing what you get back from the search results. Don't limit yourselves to just those search results. Make sure you're looking at Google News. That can be an absolute goldmine. Google Images and even Google Maps. Frankly, you never know what you can find. I'd also suggest filtering the results. So perhaps you want to put a date range, maybe just looking at content in the past year. You could also select location. So perhaps you're pushing out content for a particular client based in a particular location, in which case make sure that that's sort of aligned. A second approach for finding suitable sites and outreach targets is via scraping pages. So this again is really a great approach if you want to scale up efforts and perhaps make things a little bit more efficient rather than completely manual. The two tools or plugins rather that I like to use here are G-Infinity, which is an infinite scroll plugin, and also Link Clump. Link Clump allows you to scrape SERPs or search results with just really simply. Yeah, so sorry about that. So with G-Infinity, sorry, just one second, just lost my trail of thought. Right, so you just put your related keyword into Google, and it will return the results. And then because you'll have G-Infinity, you'll have sort of unlimited search results. So talking up to sort of however many you want essentially, and then you'll be able to extract those results via Link Clump. That will simply copy that to your clipboard, and then you'll be able to paste those into a spreadsheet of some kind, so Excel, Google, whatever it may be, Google Sheets, sorry. Again, depending on the goals of your outreach, you might want to run your URLs through something like URL Profiler to be able to fetch metrics that you're interested in, for example, domain authority or trust flow, again, really subject to what your goals are really. And then after doing that, you can prioritize and sort through the list and sort of read each URL one by one and decide whether those associated publications are worthwhile and suitable to reach out to. A third way of finding suitable sites and outreach targets is really using a plugin called Similar Sites. So again, using that stylist example, I've decided that the stylist is someone, is a publication I want to reach out to. Using Similar Sites plugin, I just simply click on it and it will turn out a nice little list of similar sites which it would seem that they would probably qualify as being suitable for my outreach list. Other paid tools that we like to use here include a lot of backlink softwares, so things like Ahrefs and Majestic. Could be that there's a piece of content that's really similar to that that you're pushing out, in which case, why not check their backlink profiles and see if it's been covered. If it has, that might offer up new opportunity in terms of sort of suitable sites to reach out to yourself. Asumo is also really great. Again, you just drop in related keywords to your content and it will return pieces of content that have received the most shares and engagement, as well as links, which again should really help you sort of build out your outreach list. It's really not the end of the world though if you don't have access to these paid tools. A couple of top tips. Follow the hashtag journo request. This is used by journalists and writers who are looking for something specific. You never know, you might have exactly what they're after. Second top tip is installing Scrap, which is a Chrome extension that allows you to extract emails really easily via LinkedIn. So a lot of sort of leading publications should have their own profiles and pages on LinkedIn, which is where Scrap really comes into its own. And a third top tip is basically becoming a bit of a stalker. So let's just say you've shared a piece of content, or you think you've got a piece of content that is absolutely right for an outreach target, but you haven't heard anything back. It could well be that that person is on holiday. If they've got Instagram, have a look. You never know. And then once they're back in town, you can send a cheeky follow-up, and hopefully that will elicit a reply. So, moving on to the all-important crafting of the outreach emails. I believe we received a question in advance about outreach emails, Robin.
We did. So we had a question in from Hayley, who just wanted to know, basically, has been using the kind of beat in terms of running her outreach emails. So basically looking at past pieces of coverage from the journalists she's targeting, obviously to tailor the emails and that kind of thing. But what kind of email really gets people interested? Word count, bullet points, headlines. I guess what kind of is the recipe for the perfect email pitch?
Yeah, it's, to be honest, sending out the emails and it is, you know, this is in a way your one shot of sort of pitching your content. It is ultimately your pitch. And it's so important because obviously after putting all that effort into finding suitable sites and things, you want to make sure that your email's seen. A lot rides on that subject line, I would say, and my top tips with that is make sure that you're concise, you sum up what it is that you have to offer, so that the person who's receiving your outreach email knows from the start what it is that they're going to read more about. So making sure that you're including sort of relevant keywords in that subject line. Don't be too spammy. This might seem a bit obvious, but you know, I think things like too much punctuation or using things like emojis is a big no, unless of course your outreach recipient happens to use that all the time, then fine, but otherwise I would avoid that. So a lot rides on that subject line. I like to consider it as a bit of a sort of teaser, I suppose, a bit like the trailer of a film. Yeah, and then again, I guess it's really dictated by what the content is that you have. So sort of going back to that point I raised earlier about being really credible. Say, for example, your content involves, I don't know, a well-known expert, or it's tied to a specific location, which your outreach recipient covers, then call that out in the subject line. Make sure that that relevancy is so obvious from the start to just really encourage them to open email. In terms of the outreach email itself, I have a few key principles that I follow. Firstly, be human. I think it's really easy to forget that you are actually emailing a person just like you and me. And also, I think this is really important to be human, because people shouldn't think that the emails that you're sending are sort of automated and sort of written by robots. So that'd be my first sort of number one. Be to the point, to be honest. Nobody has time to wade through tons and tons of text. I think, was it Hayley said, sort of up to 250 characters. I'm not sure if I'd be quite as precise as that and necessarily cap it, but I think generally as a guide, maybe no more than 3 to 4 paragraphs to sum up what it is that you have and what you're pitching. I think if your pitch email needs more than that, you might want to reconsider your approach, or maybe even what it is that you have, but hopefully you won't get to that point because you will have safeguarded sort of hooks earlier on in the process. Be confident in what you have to push out and the fact that who you're approaching is gonna want it, really. I would also think that you should also be candid in what you want, but strike a balance. So you see in this example in the left-hand side, I'm specifically asking questions. So I've said, do you think this may work as a story for your audience? If so, would you be able to include a link back to the piece when you publish it? I think you really need to gauge your outreach recipient to decide sort of whether to take a more direct or a soft approach. But I would really, really recommend asking a question in your email to encourage a reply. A reply is better than no reply, even if it's a no, I'm not interested at this time. And then my final sort of top tip when it comes to emails is sort of being credible. Spell check, make sure your grammar's on point. A really helpful plugin and tool is Grammarly. And also sort of test it. So send yourself the email, send it to your mum, make sure it looks the part. I think often actually emails, formatting in particular, can go a bit awry. So just do a few test sends to make sure it looks the part, essentially. Hope that answers your question. Feel free to follow up if not. And then the next point to sort of raise is sort of the importance of a follow-up email. Again, I think a couple of people often disregard the power of a follow-up email, particularly if your initial email doesn't receive any pickup. But I really, really encourage this. So this example on the right-hand side is how we'd go about sending a follow-up email. It's really quick, to the point. You don't need to go into too much detail because, of course, we'll be following up from the initial pitch. If possible, try and offer up something additional to what your initial pitch was. So again, in this example here, we're highlighting the fact that we've managed to acquire some additional data, which complements the original asset. And then again, doing that all-important question. So would this be of interest for you? Again, like I keep on saying, I think a reply, even if it's a no, is better than not, because then you can just not waste your effort chasing them further. When to execute outreach and follow up. I think this is quite a difficult one to really nail down. Nevertheless, there was a study by CoSchedule. They analysed over 14 studies, questioning journalists and writers and so forth, asking when they like to receive pitch emails. The results are, as you see on the screen, 10 a.m. and 8 p.m. are popular times, as well as 2 p.m. and 6 a.m. As you can see, really covering the day. Days-wise, we've got Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. So if you can, I would use this as a guide. But don't worry if you can't send your pitches during this time. Let's be honest, people work around the clock. We've all got phones, we've all got inboxes. So just keep that in mind too. I know, obviously, I've really hammered home the point that really those initial pitch emails should be personalized, and they absolutely should be. However, I do think there's a case to say when it comes to those follow-up emails, you could automate those to make your life a little bit more little easier. You could do so through a outreach management tool called BuzzStream. Alternatively, your typical sort of email providers can offer up email delays, so Outlook and Gmail. So, project postmortems and conclusions. So, after we have executed our outreach and let those sweet results come through, we always dissect how well a campaign has gone. So we'll all, not just those who did the outreach, but those sort of behind the campaign, including designers and account leads. We sit down and ask these sets of questions, essentially. What worked? What were the challenges? What was our outreach approach? Importantly, how was the content covered and shared? Did we find that the journalist or whoever preferred to use the data sets or certain visual asset? And who out of our outreach recipients were the most receptive to the content? when it comes to sort of dissecting the success or maybe failure of a campaign, it's not really about whether it succeeded or failed. It's more about taking those learnings and applying them to future outreach campaigns. The really important thing to say about outreach is that it really does take time. Don't sort of be disheartened if your first piece of content doesn't fly off the shelves from the get-go. You do need to tweak your approach. We go back to those subject lines, trying to test those and see what gets a better pickup. It just takes time, essentially. And ultimately, without this well-planned and targeted outreach strategy, the content may stand to fall. So as I said, just take your time with each step and hopefully enjoy those results.
Yeah, so
thank you very much. We'll now go to some questions that I think we've received before and maybe during.
Yeah, we've received some really good ones actually, but just conscious of time, so I'm going to select a few, and if we have missed any of the questions and they're really burning, then please do follow up with Olivia by email afterwards, and she can obviously get back to you there. But just to start with, we have a question here that is around contact information. Specific to when you can't actually find the specific email address of the person that you're trying to contact at a publication, and all you can find is a generic email address. And it's something that we struggle with when we're contacting regionals and also niche sites. So if you want to get hold of someone specific at a publication, all you have is a generic email, how would you go about doing that?
Yeah, as you say, sometimes you just, no matter how you try, you just cannot find those emails for those specific people. So what I would suggest doing is in your subject line, putting the acronym FAO, which stands for the attention of, and highlighting the particular person that you want to reach. That should hopefully find its way to them. You'd like to think that everybody works in the same office or at least building. So that would be my suggestion in this case.
How about in the body of the email? Would you alter anything there?
I would still keep the pitch sort of quite open, because although you might want to be reaching out to someone specific within that publication, it could still appeal to other people. So I wouldn't want to disregard them. But as I said, if we're calling out the specific person in the subject line, you'd hope that it'd get to them.
Okay, great. Let me take another look. Yep. So another question we have here is in regard to follow-up emails. So you obviously mentioned the importance of ensuring that you always do follow up, but how long would you wait in general before sending a follow-up email? What's the recommended time?
So that is really subject to when you sent that initial email out. Again, I suppose thinking about what day you send that email. If you sent an email out on, late on a Thursday, consider that obviously then it's going to be the weekend. Albeit people obviously do check their inboxes all the time, but typically I would say between 2 to 3 days.
Yeah, okay, great. And then I guess just to sum up here, there is one that is actually in regard to the length of kind of outreach lists. So how many targets would you usually go for per content campaign, sorry? And is 250 to 300 a small number by normal standards?
Again, this is probably quite a tricky one to answer, because it really is dependent on that campaign that you're outreaching. If your campaign sort of accommodates quite a niche sort of subset of people, I would argue that actually up to 300 is really quite a lot of people to be reaching out to. Again, I mean, I would actually be asking lots of questions. Are you sort of approaching them manually? And in which case, I think 300 is quite a lot. I'd also want to question sort of to what degree of personalization is the outreach. So those outreach emails, in which case, if it is highly personalized, maybe 300. Yeah, I think that's quite a lot. Really, yeah, it's sort of case by case, unfortunately, not so black and white. But if I just take it from a pinch of salt, I think up to 300 seems like quite a lot of people to be reaching out to. But I would really sort of go back to those sort of key principles when it comes to considering the suitability of reaching out to someone or a publication. Relevancy is really, really important. And sort of quantity, although important, I would argue quality and relevancy would outweigh. So I think in terms of use of time, I think it would make far more sense to spend time sending highly personalized outreach pitches to a smaller group of people rather than a larger set of people who would perhaps be less receptive. I hope that answers that question. If not, please follow up and I'll send some more details.
No, I think so. I think that does. I guess there's also, trial and error. We always like to have kind of batches.
Yes.
So, if one way is not really resonating well and don't seem to be getting the results that you want early on, then always kind of keep
iterating. Yeah, that's another thing to sort of bear in mind. Sort of again, going back to those criteria about when it comes to us producing content for outreach, we also always make sure that what we've got has multiple different angles. So actually, in that case, like you say, Robin, we would batch up sort of outreach so that maybe we're reaching out to 30 from, I don't know, a health sector, and then 30 for a local angle and so forth, in which case you can easily get up to that number of 300. But I think particularly from a manual approach, that seems like a decent number for sure.
So,
right.
I think that wraps up all the questions that we have today. But yeah, like I said earlier, if you have any questions burning that we haven't answered, please do pop Olivia an email and she will get back to you.
So you've got a few on the question answer one. I'll follow up individually to you guys, if that's all right. And also, I just wanted to call out the fact that we do have another webinar coming up on the 18th of September, and that is with Emily Rogers, and she'll be discussing how to encourage conversions through product page improvements. So yeah, thank you very much for your time. And yeah, if you've got any further questions, please just let us know. Thank you.